The night was quiet. Too quiet for a small town that sat just outside Atlanta, where crickets usually hummed and porch lights flickered like soft lullabies in the dark. But on this night, tension hung in the air like a storm that hadn't broken yet. Somewhere along a back road lined with shuttered shops and flickering street lamps, a black sedan rolled slowly to a stop near a broken-down convenience store. The driver's side door creaked open, and a young black girl stepped out, no older than 25. Her name was Maya. She looked calm. Too calm, maybe. Dressed in jeans and a leather jacket, with her hair pulled into a neat bun, she could have passed for just another local running a late errand. No one watching would have guessed who she really was. As she reached for her phone to check the address again, blue and red lights flashed suddenly behind her. She turned around, shielding her eyes from the glare. A police cruiser pulled up fast, gravel kicking under its tires, and a tall white officer jumped out before the car had even fully stopped. His name was Officer Grady. He was known in the area, not for heroism, but for something much darker. Locals said if you were black, brown, or just unlucky, you didn't want to run into him alone. And tonight, Maya was alone. He walked straight toward her, one hand resting on his belt, the other tightening around the grip of his weapon. "License and registration," he barked, eyes narrowing. Maya calmly pulled her wallet from her pocket and offered her ID. She said nothing. She didn't flinch, but Grady didn't even glance at the card. His eyes were locked on her face, studying her like she didn't belong. "You from around here?" he asked, his voice thick with suspicion. "I'm just passing through," Maya replied, her tone even. He looked her up and down again. Then, like a switch flipped, he stepped closer and dropped his voice. "You know how this works. Protection ain't free around here." Maya's brow lifted just slightly. "Excuse me?" I said. He repeated. "You want to be safe in this town, you pay like everyone else, unless you'd prefer something messy." Then, in a move so sudden it made the night itself hold its breath, Grady reached for his gun and pointed it right at her chest. But Maya didn't step back. She didn't panic. She just looked at him with eyes that didn't blink. She'd faced worse, much worse. And in that split second, her training kicked in. She had spent years navigating the darkest corners of law enforcement, unmasking corruption, from the inside out. What Grady didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that he was pointing a loaded weapon at one of the most highly trained senior agents in the FBI. The silence stretched. Maya's badge was tucked inside her coat, just a few inches from her hand. But she didn't reach for it yet. Not because she was scared, because she knew exactly what she was dealing with. Grady wasn't just another bad cop. He was a man who had gotten too used to being above the law. A man who had likely made threats like this before and never been held accountable. Until now. But just before Maya could speak, before she could flash that badge or turn the tables, a voice crackled through Grady's radio. "Unit 45, we've got an urgent call. Officer down on Marietta Street. Need backup immediately." Grady hesitated. For a second, his eyes darted toward his cruiser. That second was all Maya needed. And just like that, the moment passed. The barrel lowered, and Grady stepped back, muttering something under his breath before he turned away. Maya didn't say a word. She simply got back in her car, heart steady, mind focused. She wasn't done with Officer Grady, not even close. What he didn't know was that his days of running that town like a gang boss were numbered, and the countdown had already started. But while that scene unfolded under the weight of injustice and silence, miles away in a crowded city bus across Atlanta, a very different moment was happening. A moment quiet, small, but powerful in a way that would ripple far beyond what anyone could imagine. On that bus, a teenage boy, barely 17, backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds in, stood up as soon as he saw her. A pregnant woman, white, clearly tired, stepped onto the bus and looked around for a place to sit. There were none. Without a word, the teen stood and offered her his seat. Just a small gesture. Nothing flashy, no cameras, no audience, just kindness. She smiled, surprised, grateful. She sat, but instead of looking away, she reached into her purse and scribbled something on a folded piece of paper. When her stop came, she stood, handed it to him, and stepped off the bus with a quiet, "Thank you." The boy opened the note, thinking it was maybe just a polite, "God bless you." But the words on the paper made his hands tremble. His breath caught. He looked around as if someone might be filming, as if this were a dream. But it wasn't. The note wasn't just a thank you. It was something else. Something far more life-changing. And what he didn't know yet, what no one on that bus knew, was that the woman he had given his seat to wasn't just any woman, and she had just changed the course of his life forever. Back in the small town, Officer Grady was already starting to feel like something was closing in on him. And he was right. Maya hadn't come alone. She never did. The trap was set, the clock was ticking, and justice, real justice, was on its way. But none of them, not Grady, not Maya, not the teen on the bus, could predict how their stories would soon collide in a way that would shake everything. And that note, that simple folded piece of paper, it was only the beginning. Maya drove, in silence, her fingers tightening around the steering wheel. As the lights from the rearview mirror faded, her heart didn't race. She had been through worse, seen worse, but something about tonight felt different. Officer Grady was more than just a corrupt cop shaking people down. There was something in his eyes, cold, calculated, like a man who had already crossed too many lines to come back. She had come to this town on a tip, one whispered through closed doors at headquarters. But now she knew the rot went deeper than anyone suspected. And she wasn't just looking at a single bad officer. This town had secrets, and Grady was just the first layer. She pulled into a quiet motel on the edge of town and parked the car under the farthest flickering light. Inside her room, she took off her coat and pulled a file from the lining. Photos, statements, anonymous complaints that were all ignored or buried, people too scared to talk, victims who disappeared or moved away, and one officer's name that kept surfacing, Grady. There were rumors he ran a side operation, extortion, intimidation, even connections to a local business owner who had ties to a private security firm under federal investigation. But nothing had stuck, until now. She stared at the last photo in the file, an old image of a young man, no more than 22, lying face down on a dirt road. Shot during a routine traffic stop, according to the report. No body cam footage, no witnesses. Just another closed case in a town that didn't ask questions. Maya took a deep breath and turned off the light. Tomorrow, she'd go deeper. She wasn't just investigating anymore, she was inside it now. And Grady had made it personal, a cross. Grady sat in the break room of the precinct, the vending machine buzzing behind him as he sipped his coffee. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. Something about that girl didn't sit right with him. She didn't flinch, didn't plead. She looked at him like she knew something he didn't, and that made him nervous. He didn't like nervous. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He had built his life here. No one challenged him. Not the mayor, not the sheriff, he made sure of that. A few favors here, a few threats there, and most people kept their heads down. But something was shifting. That girl wasn't from around here, and she wasn't scared. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. "We got a problem," Grady muttered. There was silence on the other end. "She ain't no local. Might be a reporter, or worse. Handle it," the voice said. "No loose ends." Grady hung up and looked at his reflection in the dark window. For a second, he thought he saw something behind him. A shape, a movement. But when he turned, the room was empty. Back in the city, the teenage boy, Jalen, sat on the edge of his bed, the note still in his hand. He had read it at least a dozen times, but the words didn't change. "This is not just a thank you. You've been noticed. Please call the number below and ask for Ms. Albright. This isn't a joke. This could change your life." Underneath there was a phone number, no name, no company logo. Just that message. Short, mysterious, but something about it felt real. He stared at it, unsure if he should laugh or cry. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with his mom and little sister. He worked weekends at a diner and studied hard because his mom always told him that books were his ticket out. He didn't have time for games. But something in his gut said this wasn't a game. He picked up his phone and dialed. The phone rang once, twice. Then a woman answered. Ms. Albright speaking. Jalen froze. I was told to call this number. I gave my seat to a woman on the bus and she gave me a note. I know who you are, the woman said gently but clearly. And I'm very glad you called. Is now a good time? He hesitated. Yeah, I guess. Jalen, what you did today may have seemed small to you, but it meant something. And the person you gave your seat to, she isn't just anyone. She's a partner at a private foundation, a very powerful one. She sees hundreds of people a day, but she remembered you, your kindness, your respect, and she wants to help you, but we need to verify some things first. Jalen sat up straighter. Help me how? I'm not promising anything, Ms. Albright said. But if everything checks out, you may be eligible for a scholarship, a full one plus a mentorship program. But this will move quickly. I need you to come into the office tomorrow. Bring any school documents you have. We'll take care of the rest. He nearly dropped the phone. Wait, this is for real? Yes, she said softly. This is very real. He didn't know what to say. All because of one seat. One simple act. His mom always said doing the right thing came back around. Maybe she was right. But just as Jalen was beginning to feel hope rise in his chest, Maya sat in her motel room, watching a live feed from a hidden camera she had installed earlier that day in the town's courthouse parking lot. The footage was shaky, black and white, but clear enough. Grady was there, not in uniform, talking to two men she recognized. One ran a towing company that had been accused of stealing vehicles from unsuspecting drivers. The other was a bail bondsman with a string of dismissed assault cases. They handed Grady a package, small, wrapped in a brown bag. He looked around, then shoved it into his jacket. Maya took a screenshot. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. You're being watched. Leave. She stared at the message. Someone knew she was here. Someone didn't want her looking closer, but she wasn't going anywhere. Down the street across from the motel, a man sat in a parked pickup truck watching Maya's room through binoculars. His phone buzzed too. Message from the same source. She's not just another agent. She's connected. Be careful. He frowned, cracked his knuckles and turned off the ignition. Too late to back out now. And somewhere in the city, as Jalen lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his phone buzzed again. A new text. Unknown number. Not everyone wants you to succeed. Be careful who you trust. His breath caught. Who sent that? Why? Now? And what did they know? The pieces were moving. The lies were unraveling. And none of them, Maya, Jalen, or even Officer Grady, knew how close everything was to exploding. The sun rose over the small town like it always did, quiet, slow, indifferent to what had happened in the dark. The streets looked peaceful on the surface, with kids walking to school and shop owners unlocking their doors. But underneath, something was shifting. Maya woke early. She hadn't slept much. Too many questions. Too many pieces not yet fitting together. She had her badge in her coat and a loaded case file in her bag. But she wasn't ready to reveal who she was. Not yet. That kind of move had to be timed right. One wrong step, and the people she needed to expose would scatter like roaches in the light. She left the motel and walked to a local diner near the courthouse, a place where cops liked to gather and gossip over cheap coffee. She slipped into a booth near the back, ordered tea, and watched. Grady wasn't there, but a few officers were. She listened, head down, quietly sipping. One of them mentioned a patrol shift being cut without warning. Another grumbled about paperwork vanishing from evidence lockers. It wasn't much, but it was a thread. Something was being hidden, and someone was making sure of it. Then, just as she was finishing her tea, her phone buzzed again. A new number. No message, just a video. She hesitated, then tapped play. It was grainy, but she recognized the setting immediately. A gas station at the edge of town. The timestamp was last night. In the video, Grady stood with two other men. One of them shoved a young man to the ground, and Grady said something too muffled to hear. The kid looked terrified. Then Grady stepped forward, pulled something from his pocket and handed it to the others. The video ended abruptly. She watched it twice. There was no doubt now. Grady wasn't just shaking people down. He was working with criminals, possibly, even paying them. But why, and who was recording? Meanwhile, in the city, Jalen walked through downtown Atlanta with a folder under his arm. Inside were his report cards, a letter from his principal, and a printed copy of the note the pregnant woman had given him. He was still shaken by the message he got the night before, but he tried to shake it off. Ms. Albright had texted him the address of the foundation office and confirmed his appointment. He kept his head high, reminding himself this was real, that maybe, just maybe, something good was finally happening. When he arrived, he was surprised. The building wasn't some old non-profit space. It was a sleek, modern office tower with security. At the front desk and marble floors that echoed when he walked. He gave his name, and they sent him to the 23rd floor. The elevator ride felt like it lasted forever. Ms. Albright met him at the glass doors. She was in her mid-50s, tall, with silver streaks in her dark hair, and a smile that felt both warm and serious. "You're right on time," she said, shaking his hand. She led him into a small conference room. Everything was neat, no clutter, just a folder on the table and a bottle of water. "You made quite an impression," she said, sitting across from him. "The woman on the bus you helped, her name is Victoria Pierce. She's one of the executive partners here. She doesn't usually get involved in recruitment, but she made an exception for you." Jalen sat quietly, still unsure if he was dreaming. "We've reviewed your academic record," Ms. Albright continued. "You're consistent, focused. Your teachers speak highly of you. Victoria sees potential in you, Jalen. The kind that goes beyond test scores." He felt his throat tighten. "So, what does that mean?" "It means," she said, sliding a document toward him, "we're offering you a full scholarship to our leadership mentorship program. Housing, education, travel, all covered." He blinked. "Why me?" Ms. Albright smiled gently. "Because when no one was watching, when you had nothing to gain, you did the right thing. That's who we want. People with that kind of heart." He looked at the paper, not sure if his hands were steady enough to sign it. But while hope stirred in Jalen's life, something else was happening back in the town Maya was investigating. At the edge of town, near an abandoned sawmill, a young man named Trey was pacing nervously. He had been the one who recorded the gas station video and sent to Maya. He didn't know who she was, only that she was asking the right questions and wasn't from around here. He had been thinking about leaving town for months. Grady had threatened him once when Trey saw him beating up a man behind a pawn shop. Since then, he kept his head down. But when he saw what Grady did to that kid last night, something snapped. Trey lit a cigarette and checked his phone. No new messages. Then a sound behind him made him freeze. Tires, gravel crunching. He turned. A black SUV pulled into the lot. Tinted windows. No license plate. He backed up slowly, heart pounding. The door opened, but no one stepped out. Just a voice from the shadows. "We hear you've been talking." Trey didn't reply. "You should stop." The SUV backed out slowly, leaving behind nothing but dust. Trey stood still, breath caught in his chest. They knew. Later that night, Maya checked the same burner phone she'd been using for tips. Nothing from Trey. She called twice. No answer. Her gut told her he was scared, or worse. She wrote down his last known address and decided to visit him in the morning. Elsewhere, Officer Grady sat in a dark room flipping through photographs. Surveillance shots, faces. One of them was Maya. The other was a blurry image of Trey, and another, Jalen, on the bus. Someone had sent him this collection, but there was no name, no sender. Just the photos and a note. Too many eyes. Time to clean up. Grady crushed the paper in his fist. Things were unraveling fast. And now, more than ever, he knew this wasn't just about protecting his turf. Someone bigger was watching. Someone with power. He loaded his pistol and stared out the window. He wasn't going down without a fight. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the story had already traveled far beyond this small town or that bus ride. And soon, the truth would come crashing through all of it. With Maya getting closer, Jalen rising faster than anyone expected, and Trey caught in the crosshairs, everything was on the edge of collapse. And the worst was yet to come. The air felt heavier that morning, like the whole town was holding its breath. Clouds rolled in low and thick, casting a gray shadow over everything. Maya drove slowly down a quiet back road, heading toward Trey's last known address. Her hand stayed close to the badge tucked inside her jacket, but she wasn't ready to show it yet. She needed to know who was behind the threats, who was sending the messages, and how far the corruption stretched. Every move had to be calculated. One wrong turn, and the people she came to protect could end up hurt, or worse. Trey's neighborhood was a forgotten cluster of homes on the edge of town. The paint peeled off walls, porches sagged, and broken windows stared out like hollow eyes. She parked a block away, walked the rest of the way on foot, and knocked on the door with the number 312 barely hanging on its hinges. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. The door creaked open a few inches on its own. She stepped inside, slowly. The living room was empty except for a stained couch and a flickering lamp. A phone sat on the floor, cracked. Trey was gone. No signs of a struggle, but something was off. She scanned the room, her instincts sharp. In the corner, she spotted a shoe print in fresh dirt. Boot tread, military style. Not Trey's. Someone had been here before her. Back in Atlanta, Jalen stood in his bedroom, the scholarship offer still sitting on his desk. It didn't feel real. In just a few days, his whole life had changed. But a strange anxiety clung to him, like he was standing on a wire between two worlds. One full of promise, the other full of danger he couldn't name yet. He hadn't told anyone about the man who followed him. He hadn't told Ms. Albright about the message he received, warning him to stay quiet. It didn't make sense. What did they want from him? Later that day, as he left the foundation building, he spotted a black SUV parked across the street. Same make and model Maya had heard about. Same tinted windows. His heartbeat quickened. He ducked into a side alley and texted Ms. Albright. "I think I'm being followed again." A few seconds later, her reply came. "Come back now." He ran. Miles away, Maya sat in her car, going through the video Trey had sent her again and again. She zoomed in on the frame showing the license plate on the car Grady had arrived in. It was dirty, partially covered, but with the right angle, she could see enough. She cross-checked it with a database. The car was listed under a shell company, out of Florida. But that company was tied to another, and that one led to a known name from her past work. Someone she'd investigated years ago for federal racketeering, a man who had vanished before trial. Now she knew what she was dealing with. This wasn't just one corrupt officer, it was part of a much bigger machine. Grady was a piece of it, a pawn maybe, but dangerous. He wasn't shaking down people just to make money, he was keeping control. And Trey, Maya, and now even Jalen were threats to that control. At the same time, Grady was sitting in his cruiser, staring at a printed photo of Maya. He now knew her name, knew where she was staying. He didn't know she was FBI, not yet, but something about her didn't sit right, too calm, too quiet, not scared enough. He picked up his radio, speaking in code. "We've got a problem. The girl's digging too, deep," a voice replied. "Handle it, tonight." Maya returned to the motel just before sunset. Her door was slightly ajar. She didn't go inside. She backed up, got into her car, and drove away without looking back. She couldn't afford to play defense. Not anymore. She drove to the local library, logged into a secure line, and sent a classified file to her contact in D.C. The title on the folder read, "Operation Cinderfield, Suspected Domestic Syndicate, Embedded Law Enforcement Agents." She included Grady's name, and then she hit send. Across town, in a quiet office at the foundation, Jalen sat across from Ms. Albright, who now looked more serious than he'd ever seen her. "There's something you should know," she said, locking the door behind her. She opened a file cabinet and pulled out a dossier labeled with a red stripe. Inside were photos of Grady, of the same SUV Jalen had seen, of a warehouse located near the edge of the same town Maya was working in. "This is bigger than you think," she said. "Victoria didn't just choose you by accident. She was investigating something when you met her, something dangerous. When she gave you that note, she wasn't just thanking you. She was pulling you into something." Jalen stared at the folder. "What does this have to do with me?" "Everything," she replied. "They think you know something. They think Victoria told you more than she did. And they're scared you'll talk. But I didn't. They don't care. They just want to make sure you stay silent." Jalen leaned back, heart pounding. "What do we do?" "We fight smart," Ms. Albright said, placing a flash drive into his hand. "You'll take this to Maya. She's closer to the heart of it than anyone, but you have to be careful. Don't go the main roads, and trust no one." Meanwhile, Trey was hiding, not far. He had escaped just minutes before the SUV arrived at his house. He'd watched them through the slats of an old barn, phone gripped in his shaking hands. He still had one more video, the one they didn't know about. It showed Grady meeting a man in a suit, someone Trey had never seen before, handing over a folder and pointing to a wall covered in photos. One of those photos was Maya, another was Jalen. He didn't know who these people were, but he knew he had to get the video to Maya, or no one would be safe. As night fell, 3 stories moved toward one another, each step building toward the same place. Maya drove toward the outskirts of town, following coordinates sent by her contact in D.C. Jalen packed a bag and left with Ms. Albright's assistant, heading into unfamiliar backroads. Trey moved through shadows, avoiding headlights and noise, every sound making his heart stop. Grady? He was already at the warehouse, and he wasn't alone. People were coming in from out of town, quiet, armed, efficient. They weren't here to ask questions. They were here to end something. The clock was ticking. The trap was almost set. And none of them, Maya, Jalen, Trey, could see how close they really were to the center of it all.